Coming up on today's episode of Four Verts, I'm your host, Harrison Graham. Why is Shedeur Sanders' draft stock tanking, or why does it appear to be tanking coming out of the NFL Combine? We're going to try to decipher that, get you caught up on the latest here on today's show. Before we dive in, though, we have a full offseason of coverage ahead for you guys here on Four Verts. You're already seeing a lot of action happen. Some trades that have gone down, news, roster cuts, free agency next week, the draft after that. Things are heating up in the National Football League, and we're going to have you guys covered here on Four Verts. So subscribe to the channel. It is free. Turn on those notifications. That way you never miss an episode from us here on the channel. With that being said, let's dive into Shedeur Sanders. Is Shedeur Sanders' draft stock tanking? It appears that could be the case at least a little bit here. As there's been a lot of chatter coming out of the NFL Combine, different draft analysts, some other leaks that have been out there. So let's just kind of dive on in here. Todd McShay, well-respected draft analyst, has connections to front offices in the NFL, had this to say. He said 2 teams in the top 10 drafting that need a quarterback, the 2 people that I spoke to, 1 from each team, 2 people in these positions, left the meeting feeling like Shedeur Sanders was not overly concerned with what they thought of him. They had a 15-minute meeting with him, and when they were done, they both said in different ways and in different words that they did not feel like Shedeur Sanders cared that much what the organization thought of him. One person said it wasn't a professional approach by him. And look, I do just want to get this out there as a disclaimer, because you see this every year. For whatever reason, certain prospects get hit with labels. They don't care about football. They aren't a good teammate. They don't work hard. They have a bad attitude. Sometimes there's truth to that with certain guys. Sometimes it couldn't be further from the truth. I know there was a lot of chatter around Caleb Williams last year. Most of it ended up not really being the case. I don't know how much of this is true with Shedeur. He certainly is a confident guy. He certainly enjoys the spotlight. He certainly has made a lot of money as an NIL athlete. He's Deion Sanders' son, who is one of the cockiest and rightfully so athletes in the history of the NFL. So, look, I could see there being a case where, maybe he comes off a little too confident. Because at the end of the day, these GMs, these scouts, they don't care that he's Deion's son. Can he lead their organization? He's a quarterback. If he's a receiver and he's a little nonchalant in these meetings, it's like, if the guy can go catch 80 balls for 1,200 yards, we don't really care. But he's got to lead the franchise. And again, I don't know what's completely true. What is it? His teammates certainly have spoken highly about him. There's a lot to like about Shedeur Sanders based on what we've seen out of the player and that he's been able to elevate a program like Colorado. But at the same time, I do think it's interesting that Todd McShay is saying that 2 different people from 2 different teams using different words are saying the same thing, right? Like, I do think when it's a multiple source situation, that does get a little concerning. That 2 teams inside the top 10 that need quarterbacks, while using different words and phrases, say, he didn't seem that interested when we were in the meeting. So I do think that is noteworthy and worth discussing, even if I'm fully acknowledging you hear stuff like this every year, and it's hard to decipher what truly is true and what isn't so true. So let's just take a look at teams picking inside the top 10, right? And the number next to the team is the current draft pick they're in. Obviously, you got the top 3 picks that all need quarterbacks: Titans, Browns, Giants. You got the Raiders at 6, Jets at 7, Saints at 9. Although, if they keep Derek Carr, they probably wouldn't draft a quarterback, but I threw them in there as well. I feel pretty confident about one of the 2 teams that McShay is referring to. Josina Anderson went on Twitter and kind of went into full defense of Shedeur, but I do just want to kind of outline this to kind of explain why I think I know which one of the teams is. I am disappointed to hear, she says, that a quarterback's coach from a team drafting in the top 7 referred to Shedeur Sanders as coming off as, quote, brash and, quote, arrogant in his team interview and making his assessment known to a number of people per source. I'm purposely not naming the team as it's not to directly call the team out. According to league sources, said QB coach seems to have an issue with the, quote, the culture of athletes who have had broad fame and financial success before entering the NFL. The fact that she used team picking, drafting in the top 7, that's a tell to me. That sounds like the Jets. Like, wouldn't you just say top 10, top 5? Like, no one uses the phrase top 7. I think it's pretty obvious one of these two teams that McShay has sourced information from is the New York Jets. I think that's pretty clear. Now, who's the other one? Is it the Giants at 3? Is it the Titans? Maybe the Titans make sense because they've been hesitant, apparently, to picking a quarterback in this year's draft. I'm not really sure. And again, as time goes on, we'll have a clearer view of this and this whole idea as we're going to get into some mock drafts that have been discussed here. Oh, he's sliding. Like, sometimes there's draft prospect fatigue, and it kind of evens out after the pro day circuit and all that. So there's a lot of time to play out here, but there's certainly a lot of noise around Shedeur coming out of the combine. Now, Dane Brugler, who I respect a ton as a draft analyst, I think he's arguably the best in the game. I think he could work in a front office, if I'm being completely honest. He put his post-combine mock draft out, and he had him sliding to 21st to the Pittsburgh Steelers in his post-combine mock. Here's what he had to say. Sanders is going to be a wild card in this draft. He could go in the top 6 or fall out of the first round entirely, and neither outcome would be a shock. He is not a first-round quarterback for a lot of NFL teams, which isn't a major surprise and matches my evaluation. He's saying, from his just grade the player as a, from a physical tools and just ability to play the position standpoint, not the, the intangible stuff, the stuff that McShay is referring to where, leading the team and all that stuff. And look, I'll be honest. Shedeur Sanders has average physical tools. And that's not me ripping him. It's just watch him. Like, he has an average arm. He is an average athlete. I think, he holds the ball too long. Like, there's things in his game that nothing really screams out, right? Like, you think of quarterbacks the last several years, things that scream out. Like, just go to last year. Just go through a few of them. Caleb Williams, incredible arm talent, elite ability to make plays outside of structure, right? Jaden Daniels, phenomenal runner, good deep ball thrower, right? Drake May, built like Josh Allen, big, strong arm, all that stuff. Even Michael Penix, huge arm. J.J. McCarthy, premier athlete. Like, all these guys that have had stuff or that have gone high in recent years, you can point to at least one trait where you're like, that is elite. Shedeur is a physical player. No part of his game is elite. I think all of his game is solid. I don't think he has a huge weakness. But there's nothing that stands out like that is a top 10 quarterback trait once he enters the league. Now, there are things you like, right? Like, he's played a lot of ball. 4 years of college ball, 2 at Jackson State, 2 at Colorado. He pointed this out himself, and I think he's right that, hey, if you want to elevate a franchise, draft me because I've done it twice at the college level. And he has. He did it at an HBCU, and he did it at Colorado, arguably one of the worst Power 5 programs in recent memory. And by year 2, they were flirting with going to the Big 12 championship game. That's pretty impressive. Obviously put up big numbers. I think he has good accuracy. If you were going to point to one thing that is close to an elite trait, I think he's pretty accurate. Now, a lot of it's behind the line of scrimmage, the way they played offense at Colorado, but I do think that's his best physical attribute is his accuracy. And one thing I really respect about Shedeur's game when I just watch him as a player, he's tough as hell. I mean, he has taken a beating the last 2 years at Colorado, especially that first year. I mean, they couldn't block me, much less Division I pass rushers. It was an ugly scene, and he stood in there, took hits, got back up, took a lot of sacks, a lot of hits, was willing to take hits to hang in there and deliver the football. So I actually respect the hell out of that part of his game. Like, he is a tough player. I like that he has a lot of experience. There's a lot to like. But when Dane says, for my evaluation, he's more of a second-round player, I understand. Because 10 years ago, Shedeur Sanders, if his last name isn't Sanders probably, most people are like, yeah, it's a second-round player. But as time has gone on, there's a QB tax. I mean, Bo Nix, same way last year. And look, he turned out better than we thought as a rookie. He goes second round 10 years ago. But, like, it seemed to shift probably around the time E.J. Manuel and Christian Ponder went in the first round. Like, historically, those guys go on day 2. I think the same is true with Shedeur because he's got average traits. And that doesn't mean he can't be a starter in the league. It just means how high is the ceiling. I think there are limitations there. And then when you couple that with some of these leaks, like, can he be a strong leader? Like, again, I don't know that. I'm just listening and kind of discussing and giving my take on what the McShays of the world are saying, and they are much more tapped in than I am. And then you tie in this. Cam Ward, the one consistent thing coming out of the combine when it came to the quarterback position is not only is Cam Ward QB1, he's consensus QB1 in this draft, And there's a bigger gap between Cam Ward and Shedeur than Shedeur and the other prospects. Jackson Dart, Will Howard, Tyler Shuck, Jalen Milroe, whoever you want to put into that group. Now, for me, it's Cam Ward, Shedeur, next group of guys. I would have Dart at the top of that X group, but I do think there's at least a gap between Shedeur and the rest of the guys. But it sounds like these NFL teams think Shedeur is kind of just in that group with those other guys when it comes to evaluating him as a player. Again, that's just the physical trait stuff. So that's pretty interesting. And look, if you are being objective, I think if you're an average sports fan, football fan, that just turns on highlights, you don't have to watch the tape. Oh, the tape says this. Just watch these two guys throw the football. Cam Ward has far better physical tools. He just does. It's not a slight at Shedeur. He's got a much stronger arm. Cam Ward does. He can throw with different angles, with velocity, deep ball touch. The fastball is there. Shedeur doesn't really have a fastball. He just doesn't have a rocket launcher of an arm. Cam Ward, I would say, has an A-minus NFL arm. It's not Josh Allen, but it's a tier below that. Really good arm. Shedeur Sanders is more like an Andy Dalton arm. Like, it's a fine NFL arm, but, like, he's going to have to throw with anticipation. He's going to have to win with his mind, which is something he did a lot at Colorado, so he's got that going for him. But from a physical standpoint of who has a better chance to reach a higher ceiling, that's Cam Ward, because you're working with more tools if you are these NFL teams. So to just kind of put a wrap on all this, we're just under 2 months out, so there's still a lot of time here. He's going to meet with teams at his pro day and for top 30 visits and all that stuff. But I will say this. If this was a deeper QB class, like let's say he would have come out last year. Remember, there was chatter he could come out. He went back to school. Great decision. 1, to get another year starting experience at the Power 4 level. And 2, now he's entering a draft that's a weak QB draft. But had he come out last year, he's probably 6th, 7th quarterback taken. Maybe he goes ahead of Bo Nix, but the other 5 for sure go ahead of him. I still think he's going to go pretty high because there's always QB-needy teams. It only takes one. Like, even if a team inside the top 10 doesn't, someone will probably trade up. Like, some team is going to take a shot on Shedeur Sanders because there is a lot to like there. But it'll be interesting to see what other breadcrumbs come out over the next, 4-6 weeks leading up to the NFL draft. So am I fully buying the stock tanking? I don't know. Is it slipping a bit? I think that's possible. Maybe instead of going top 3, he goes 8 or something like that. I don't buy it. Like, I saw Trevor Sikkema, who I think does a great job for PFF. He didn't have him going in the first round in his post-combine mock. Like, you don't think one team is going to take him in the first round? I'd be stunned if that ended up being the case. I mentioned a minute ago, E.J. Manuel, Christian Ponder, like, the amount of bad QBs that went in the first round, like, Shedeur's better than those guys. Like, I think he's going to go in the first round. Okay, what say you? Will Shedeur Sanders fall outside of the top 10? I think that's like a fair measurement question. Round 1, I think that's ridiculous. He's going to go in the first round, but maybe he slips outside of the top 10. Type Y for yes, he will fall outside of the top 10. Type N for no. Right now, my gut tells me he's still going to go top 10 just because it's not a good QB class, and I do think he's a clear number 2 guy in this class, but we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of 4 Verts. My name is Harrison Graham. Plenty to come. It's a busy time in the NFL. We're going to have all major storylines covered with my reaction. And until then, we'll see you next time.